Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change. That is crazy.
Well, we do live in an insane world. People push the boundaries of willing ignorance on a daily basis. Selfishness, short-term thinking, buying the annual FIFA release. And while some call it stupidity, the truth is there's multiple facets to this perceived insane behavior. Ignorance and lethargic thinking are both constants throughout the history of humanity. Another constant would be that of change, something Ubisoft has rediscovered. Oi mate, get on with the fucking video! Alright, let me level with you. For any big boy publisher, their flagship franchises are their holy grails. And the owners of said grails are very concerned about this little thing called change, see Call of Duty. Following said trends and tailing new ones is the industry standard for these lads. Which is why Far Cry 5 amuses me. It's not as big a change as we had going from 2 to 3. But in an environment where ditching your campaign in favor of Battle Royale is considered innovation, it's not hard to color me impressed. For the series that wrote the book on how to make a modern open world game, to openly reject the memes it spawned is commendable.
I know what you're thinking, and no. I ain't gonna have you climbing towers all over the county for me, so don't worry.
You son of a... Of course, one thing the game has assuredly left the same is the opening style. And good god, what is it with Far Cry games and their openings? I mean that in a good way. I'm not nearly creative enough to come up with multiple ways to run away from the antagonist within the first 5 minutes of a video game. But someone at Ubisoft is, and thank fuck for that guy. First impressions are everything. They contextualize every interaction you have with a person or entity henceforth. By god, do you need a good first impression. The Far Cry games have always been about exotic locations. Not necessarily Seychelles exotic, but exotic nonetheless. The announcement that the latest entry would take place in the States was one that I felt rather conflicted about. The Bible Belt just doesn't excite me the way the Himalayas do, you feel? So what then must a developer do to drive the player to explore such a locale? It's simple really. Put more emphasis on the exploration as a core element. I can't speak much for the first two games as I've never really played them, and I'm not gonna pretend I have, but I'm overly familiar with the format they've taken since Far Cry 3. Climb Radio Tower, get shown a few slightly exciting locations, have a couple icons saying, "Oi, there's shit down here," and when the other spots are all clearly shown to you, well, why the fuck would I go there? So enter Far Cry 5. No more radio towers, the map is uncovered by actually traveling through it. Wow, revolutionary, who'da thunk it? Though if you're up in the air, you're shit out of luck. No way you found a hunting spot while you were half a kilometer off the ground. Alternatively, go talk to the locals or find maps. The exploration is very much an active component of the game this time around. New locations are now made worth visiting by the simple addition of a single component. Prepper stashes. The stashes contain 3 skill points each, some ammo and crafting materials, and usually a safe with valuables. And the areas around them are designed to be interesting. Not only are these locations intriguing on their own, but more often than not, they present the player with a simple puzzle or obstacle to get around before gaining access to the stash itself. This solves the exploration conundrum threefold. There's the satisfaction of overcoming the environment-based obstacles, the curiosity in checking out said areas, and a reward to incentivize further exploration. On the other end of the spectrum are the combat-oriented locations, the outposts, the cult properties, the Walmarts, and what have you. I couldn't really get through the previous games without clearing the map of red markers. It was like an itch I had to scratch. Here, not so much. This all essentially stems from the removal of the red zone, the miserable paint on the map that said, "Hey fucker, some lads over here think you ain't shit." 5 says no to this. It takes a more indirect approach instead, by not doing that. As you liberate areas, you'll start finding less and less of them as time goes on, which is a big duh, but not pointing it out in such a gamey manner adds a layer of abstraction, making it feel a touch more immersive. And immersiveness seems to be something Ubisoft kept in mind while making this. Bullets have travel time added to them, though they remain hit scan at close range. However, this travel time falls between negligible to noticeable, meaning most of your standard shots are just annoyingly off by a couple centiseconds. And snipers at ranges over 150 meters easily take over 100 milliseconds to arrive, which is taking this needless feature to new heights. I appreciate ballistic physics in a game like Ghost Recon Wildlands, which is meant to be played tactically and with some semblance of stealth, with a pace of action at a far Far Cry game is way too high to bother making minute adjustments to lead my shots. They didn't bother going the whole mile and including bullet drop, but turned travel time up to 11, as if to make it hard to ignore this half-baked feature and expect people to praise it. When I play a game where wingsuiting off a cliff and dive bombing onto someone is within the realm of possibilities, I think there's a line you gotta draw for realism, especially when it's as forced in as this. It's a bug! It's a feature! It's a pain in the ass! Ballistics aside, the combat itself has a generally quicker pace. The health bar is now one solid chunk that regenerates steadily. This restricts quick healing to crafted medkits and eliminates the need for slow manual healing animations. Aiming no longer feels like you're trying to turn the camera through a thin wad of butter. And melee weapons find a surprising role. Not as actual melee weapons, but as throwables. Now, Ubisoft didn't feel like that was enough change, so they went and phased out the skill tree in favor of a perk system. It's no longer possible to earn XP and level up. Rather, you gain skill points through the aforementioned prepper stashes and some challenges. This again reinforces the drive for exploration, and prompts you to explore different parts of the content available. This aside, the skinning of numerous animals to expand the size of your inventories has also been replaced with the perk system. However, while this decision serves to improve the gameplay experience, it comes at the expense of diluting the survival experience that the series was known for. It can be argued that the average American depends more on processed products rather than handcrafted equipment. In a way, it can make sense representing a cultural difference. This also seems to make itself evident by way of hunting. Since the only thing you can do with pelts is sell them, hunting takes a backseat and puts fishing in the forefront instead because, hey, it's new. And I ended up investing a lot more time into fishing than I thought I would. But much like using guns in the original Mirror's Edge, a lot of it comes from the sheer novelty of being able to do so rather than from any deeper engaging mechanics. Ubisoft's experience creating companion AI in Far Cry Primal has been put to use building a roster of specialized comrades. Unfortunately, the pathfinding is a bit wonky, and the fact that you and your partners can continuously pick each other up trivializes most gunfights. But the biggest problem here is the lack of necessity. Even ignoring all the countless wannabes claiming they can make a difference, I can do stealth just fine on my own without Robin Good-for-Nothing getting stuck on a tree. And Herc, while an absolute pleasure to lug around, is more a threat to you than he is to any of the enemies. Though that's probably in character for him. And even then, the game's a cakewalk on the hardest difficulty without any compadres to help. And the reason for that is plain and simple. The enemies are dipshits. Sure, you're given an assortment of methods with which to ruin their day. And if that wasn't enough, you can sick this meat tank of a grizzly on them. What's not to love? To start with, there's only 3 different flavors of enemies. Vanilla, thick vanilla, and McDonald's vanilla. You want a real example of enemy variety? Look no further than the last 2 main games. The charge's distinct bolt markers immediately meant you had to eliminate them lest they suicide charge you. Heavies were truly slow and lumbering, but having 2 attack you at the same time was downright intimidating. The only time you could confidently one-up them was through the element of surprise, and guerrilla tactics became your best friend, right next to the OP sniper you'd eventually find. The hunters could tame any animal in their vicinity and couldn't be permanently marked, prioritizing them as targets, since any predators you baited over could be turned against you. Contrast this with how bowmen in Far Cry 5 are just vanilla boys with bows that happen to come with wolves, making them just another enemy in a firefight. The snipers from 3 were a tangible threat. The thick undergrowth let you move quickly through their line of sight, keeping the pace of gameplay quick, even when slow or calculated movement was required. You were pushed to prioritize different enemies in order of engagement, whether you were in stealth or active combat, juggling between various targets just to survive. In every firefight, you established an hierarchy of threats based on the situation. You only ever used cover to break visual contact, it never became a crutch to cling to. This kind of cat and mouse game is what characterized many of the encounters I used to have. But no more. In Far Cry 5, every enemy is indistinct from one another. They all behave the same and just have different weapons and health values. They don't require you to change your playstyle or challenge you in any way, aside from attacking in numbers. They bum rush you without any sense of self-preservation. No flanking routes, no push and pull, no leading. And the feral, mindless remnants of Bliss experiments were an interesting take on zombie enemy types, adding tension without really carrying the stigma that comes with outright putting zombies in. No, they're doing that right now. And they're the only game changer, acting as a high health stand-in for the chargers. But the variety ends there. Something that genuinely infuriates me about this game is stealth. Now, I've never taken the Far Cry games for dedicated stealth titles. The mechanics are bare bones, but the AI is just dumb enough to manipulate while having fun. But there are 2 major issues that the previous games didn't face. The first one being that it barely allows any room for error. You either pull off a headshot on your first go, or you shoot the exact number of bullets to the body needed to kill them. Except that sniper rounds pierce their bodies and come out the other side, the high cal ones, I mean. And the sound of impact sends the outpost into a frenzy. And what happens when they're alerted? Well, of course, like any group of humans with a 6th sense connected via a hive mind, they all home in on your exact location, This isn't me putting a tempest in a teapot. The AI in this game suffers from what I like to call omniscience syndrome. When a group of highly trained elite military forces with FLIR cameras on their helis hear a missed shot, their brutal efficiency figuring out the shooter's location makes some sense. But when cartel thugs and rednecks can pull the same shit off with nothing but the power of friendship, you better fucking believe I have some questions. Another concern is how chain takedowns don't even work half the time because the enemies notice you midway through. I never once had this issue in previous Far Cry's. It's the developer's job to account for this. In the Batman Arkham games, for instance, when you're behind an enemy, they're much less likely to turn around, because you're presumably going for a takedown. Having your strategy ruined by the odds not being on your favor is bullshit, and Rocksteady accounted for it. Informing you of this outright would ruin the illusion, so it's all done behind the scenes to improve the gameplay experience. And the best part is, as bad as the enemy AI is, your teammates are even worse. A number of the challenges I mentioned earlier involved getting X amount of kills with each sidekick. I wanted perk points, I tried completing these challenges, and after a solid 15 minutes of trying to get Sharky to rack up a whopping 5 kills, I fucking gave up. There is a grand total of 3 unique comrades worth having. Nickrai the nice guy on the off chance he actually manages to take down an aircraft. Boomer I'll sniff you to Doomer, who marks every enemy in a 20-meter radius. And Cheeseburger. They all make an already easy game even easier by doing a portion of the work for you. Why call Nick on a chopper or a plane when I could just snipe the pilot? Eh? And again, for me to gain skill points, I need to let someone else do the killing? What? And here's something even better. This bland and lacking weapons list. There is such a thing as too many options. I am aware that analysis paralysis is a thing. But the shoddy selection of weapons in Far Cry 5, given what we had just one game prior, is insulting. Because here we are just one main game later, and we have literal reskins with no changes in stats. And while some weapons certainly do feel different from others, that number comes to about 3 per category. The best part? Some weapons have premium wrapped versions that cost a pretty penny to own. But even though they're the exact same gun, you need to rebuy attachments for them. Hey, if you buy attachments for one version of the gun, let's have it not carry over to the other. Somebody get me a rope and a stool because this man needs a raise. Could've just made them skins, Ubisoft. Didn't have to make them new weapons, Ubisoft. Now, the previous games, it took you a sizable amount of time to build up an arsenal. Until then, you always felt vulnerable and underprepared, forcing you to think through tactics. Here, you're given everything you need for overwhelming success within the first hour. That's taking the power fantasy knob and dialing it up to 11. Out of curiosity, I tried taking down an outpost in Jacob's region near the start, using nothing but a base 1911 with no teammates, without stealth. Surprise, surprise, it took no effort whatsoever. I'm not even that good at shooters, ask anyone I play online with. They'll tell you my aim is cancer-inducing. And this was still easier than launching the game. Point is, if you're looking to play this game for a challenge, don't. As far as traversal goes, the fun option is a ground vehicle, but the efficient answer is choppers and planes. Problem is, it's boring as hell. Choppers make it ridiculously easy to take down enemies, so they're not even fun for combat. And being in the air presents no real threat to you, so all that's left is to hold forward until you reach your destination. The planes take it one step further, because you don't even have to be pushing forward. And I refuse to talk in depth about the Clutch Nixon events. I played the first 3 I came across and never touched them again. Because I realized something. It's not a task that demands skill. All that really stands between you and winning is uncertainty. Uncertainty as to whether or not you've placed yourself properly to take the next checkpoint. If you feel like you're not gonna make it, better hit that restart button. They're designed for repetition, to be completed on your second, third, or fourth go around. Compare that to a game that's the epitome of fun and creative traversal, Just Cause 3. Initially, the wingsuit feels like a clunky, unpredictable piece of garbage, but with some practice, it becomes infinitely more satisfying to use. If you're good, you can recover from just about any screw-up, and go so far as to thread the needle for bonus points consistently on your first try. The degree of skill and control required in Just Cause 3 makes the wingsuit challenges fair game. Let's go back to Far Cry 4, the gyrocopter. This measly piece of shit felt like it'd fall apart at any moment. It didn't come with turrets, chain guns, or rockets. It was just you and a dinky baby chopper incapable of flying too high that felt like it'd break down at any point mid-flight if you so much as sneezed on it. All you had to keep you safe was a sidearm. Add to this the verticality of Kirat, and you had a world that it was purpose-built for. It fit in thematically, and it made flying an involving and often dramatic experience. Press forward traversal and an overpowered air fortress in a game that's already piss easy is something I can more than live without. This game may very well have some of the most uncreative side missions I've seen in a big budget game period. Another one has you tossing a piece of meat to a cougar every 10 feet to get her to go somewhere. Riveting stuff. There were 2 mission sets I found interesting, period. One involved helping an alien-obsessed guy teleport, and the other involved obtaining bull testicles for something called a testy festy. It's wacky and outlandish, but these are very Far Cry things to do. Why the other quests had to be so dull and uninspired is beyond me. Well, at least they have nice characters, some of them.
If them Obama-loving libtards find out I can't look after my own property, I can kiss this Senate run goodbye.
Oh boy, Mr. Herc. With an attitude like that, forget being senator. You could be the president.
Let's get to the point. You see that steaming pile of disappointment over there praying? That's my loin fruit, Herc Jr. Dumber than a coal bucket. He takes after his mama.
It doesn't matter that there are a couple of good missions. If the vast majority of them are about as bland as raw tofu, I'd just rather not. This inability to take advantage of settings and situations is at its peak during the escape sequences. A number of main missions take you from the vast open world and stick you in a confined corridors where you play Pop Goes the Weasel in a bunker. These sequences are always reserved for pivotal moments in the final act of an arc, in the form of a mighty hurrah that asks you to bring all your skills to the table and test your mettle. This all goes out the window when everything in said sequence is linear, scripted, and can be taken at your own pace. Imagine the boulder scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the boulder only rolled when Indy took a step forward. You could sit down, eat a sandwich, have a nap, and continue on whenever he pleased. Sure, the bunker may be exploding, but the section you're in is A-OK until you leave the room. And with all the systems, mechanics, and surrounding attributes peeled off, we can finally move on to the juice, the theme, the plot, the antagonist. This fucking idiot! I'm not the kind of guy who pays much attention to trailers. I only ever watch them if I happen across them, with some exceptions. Yeah! I've only seen one trailer for Far Cry 5, one that gave me the impression that we'd be playing 3 characters in a style similar to GTA 5. Nick, Mary Sue, something or other, and Pastor Jer. Oh my god, I'm not sure how the Lord feels about you putting a firearm in his book. Anyway, so imagine my surprise when I found out I'd just be playing a mannequin. You thought that was another joke. You thought wrong. Sure, you can put a face and hair on him, dress them up, pretend they're a person, much like you would a Barbie doll. But that right there, that's a mannequin. No emotions, no expression via body language, no speech, just silence. And sure, the whole voiceless protagonist shtick does work when you're projecting yourself as the character. In this simple regard, the switch to a silent protagonist can be argued to have been made for the better. But that all falls flat when the cutscenes and dialogue show up. Let's take a step back into the previous games again. They wove the antagonist into the main missions in a way that felt natural. They were presented in a way that felt like they were always there, always watching. There was a narrative purpose to your character being there too, and a direct tie to the antagonist in some way. And the dynamic between the two, the back and forth that changed over the course of the game, had a marked importance. Your interactions with Vaas over the course of the game and the emergence of Jason's wilder, more instinctual side built a unique relationship between the two, going from a mirror that represented their differences to one that showed their growing similarities. I've linked a really interesting video in the description, so check that out. It's from Ryan Hollinger, and good god, if you liked Far Cry 3, you need to see that. Ajay from Far Cry 4 had a familiar link to Min, though this admittedly wasn't used to its fullest potential. But these characters had a specific purpose and deep tie to the overarching story. When Pagan Min looked you in the eye as he spoke, there was a tangible, personal weight to it. There was a tinge of excitement every time you heard him address you directly, curious to know what he had to say. When the father addresses you as deputy, when you sit there in silence as his family taunts, tortures, and coaxes you into joining them, there's only the reminder that you're a silent avatar. Your relationship with Joseph Seed isn't personal. It's never developed beyond 2 cardboard cutouts who want each other dead. Him winning over you doesn't hold any weight, the way Vaas got into Jason's mind or Pagan's history with the Gales. And because of the way the story is presented, you know you'll never meet his siblings until you fill up their quotas. And you know you'll never run into him until the final mission. He doesn't feel like an actual threat. Even worse, all your interactions with him consist of him standing with his face a foot away from the camera, spouting what may as well be nonsense for minutes on end. The previous game's villains were dynamic. They moved to express their words. They made themselves felt in the world around them. The most Joseph ever does in a cutscene is give his brother a hug and then just go back to servicing you with a close-up. But let's, for a moment, put all that aside, because god, there is so much I have to say about the antagonists, and talk about something crucial here. Motive. This entry's charismatic villain takes the form of Joseph Seed, self-professed savior and full-time cult leader. The plot revolves around his cult, Eden's Gate, built on the belief that a rapture is coming, and the Seed siblings are to protect and prepare the people for what is to come. A cult like Eden's Gate would generally have 3 stages. The formation, followed by the build-up, both of which are only mentioned via collectible notes and some dialogue here and there, after which there would be 2 possible paths. In Route A, the majority of the county folk don't buy into the cult and take a stance against it. In Route B, Far Cry 5 happens. There's a big problem with this. Everyone you meet hates Joseph and his cult, and the notes are almost exclusively from people who hate the cult. And the general consensus is that the cult should have gone down Route A. It didn't. The game changer was Bliss, aka family-friendly LSD for that lower age rating. I'm sorry, but when the vast majority of the cult consists of people who didn't want to be there, I'm gonna have a hard time buying in any arguments its leader is trying to sell me, especially when no one I meet buys in it either. Alright, you say, so the villain doesn't have many valid points. It's still fucked up that he's torturing and drugging people into joining his cult. To which I say, oh yeah it is. Until you come across the reason he built the cult in the first place. Remember when I said it was built on the belief that a rapture was on its way? He wasn't talking about the second coming. No, that was a very roundabout way of saying,
Tactical nuke incoming!
I don't get this. The game constantly references the state of hysteria in the news via the radios, the weak-mindedness of politicians, and how the world is leading closer and closer to the edge, which is really the closest this game has gotten to realism. How Joseph knew about the nukes for sure, I couldn't tell you. But I can tell you why he didn't just warn people instead. This isn't a man who acted out of concern for his fellow men, obviously. This is a man who wanted to be right. A man who wanted to have the last laugh so bad, he'd blow up thermonuclear warheads on American soil if that's what it took. And there are no hints of this, no signs pointing towards Joseph's own personal stock of ICBMs. It just comes right out of left field, with the full force of a surprise bitch slap to the player's face. If we could stumble across the warheads while playing, read a note about them, have a chance to disable them in advance to have a secret good ending, hell, anything related to it, I'd be so much more forgiving of this. The only hint that I could make out was that his siblings had set up their bases in missile silos, which I really did like. But no one ever breathes a word about the live nukes sitting around. When they finally go off without you even being able to glean any outright info about them, it feels like a serious gut punch. Joseph and his family's motives didn't make sense to me initially. I classed them as a bunch of sociopathic idiots, but there was more to them than that. They weren't some class act of morons. Their story was almost akin to a tragedy. A mentally scarred group of individuals with their own pain, only able to give what they have. But any amount of understanding I developed about these characters flew right out the fucking window when I started thinking about the ending. Never mind the power of yes, never mind turning to hallucinogens, never mind using a Skinner box to create unwilling murderers. When the secret backbone of all of this was one idiot and his need to set off nukes to prove a point I wasn't buying in the first place, you have completely lost any of the fucks I had to spare. The pieces for a decent tragedy are there, but this one wrench thrown into the works ruins it all. The world tells its own story, and the one-sided conversations match up with that story, but the main ending is a completely distinct entity from all that. It's akin to a plot twist for the sake of a plot twist with next to zero foreshadowing. There's a storytelling principle you may know of, Chekhov's gun, that seeks to eliminate all unnecessary elements in a story to avoid false promises. And the converse is true. Bringing a nuke into play with next to zero previous mention of it is amateurish at best. And maybe if you don't think too hard about it, you'll get a bit of a kick out of the shock value each ending provides. But I don't want to have to turn off my brain to enjoy a story that's just bad writing. And that was the best way I could look at it. There's also the possibility that the nukes were just Deus Ex Machina to demonstrate Joseph's non-existent point. But I don't even want to entertain that train of thought, because prepping for a nuke doesn't fucking necessitate building a cult and torturing the neighborhood in a submission. Far Cry 5 is a marked step down from every other entry in the series. From every title, Far Cry 1 through the Blood Dragon, we got a different, refined experience with each one. This game is a step backwards. It doesn't do jack diddly squat that's really new and improved. It doesn't elaborate on any existing mechanics. It lowers weapon variety, adds annoying physics, has shitty AI, and to top it all off, it has an aggravating story. It's a game I've played twice before, and it doesn't even live up to either of them. When I started up this game, when I walked out of Dutch's bunker for the first time, I felt like I was gonna love it. But this sack of stupid is hardly something I'd say is worth a buy. There's no reason to keep giving it 8s and 9s, because if those were honest scores, they'd make the 6-year-old version of itself that it's copying a 12. Certainly, if you've never played one before, Far Cry 5 is a good game. It looks fantastic with polished mechanics and a decent sense of humor. And if you enjoyed it, I'm not gonna chastise you. If you had fun, and that's what matters. But I'd be doing someone a disservice by recommending it over 3 or 4. But its greatest weakness is a result of its predecessor's existence. Far Cry 1 was an innovative experience for the time. 2 was a hardcore survival experience. 3 was a genre-defining masterpiece. Blood Dragon was a wacky twist on those mechanics. 4 was a refinement of those mechanics, and Primal was an experimental title. Much like its enemies, Far Cry 5 can best be summed up as vanilla. Sure, it's hard to hate the flavor, but when there's a tub of chocolate fudge 2 feet away, the answer is obvious. Butterscotch.